A mysterious assassin in a scarlet tuxedo and tall hat leisurely adjusts his bow tie and coldly pronounces his code name, the Jack of Hearts. Balancing on the taut rope, he stepped confidently forward, as if floating above the shimmering night city, where the lights of cars flashed below. Behind him, an entire floor collapses with a deafening roar, engulfed in puffs of flame and smoke. The Jack of Hearts opens the book indifferently, as if reading were more important than the chaos he has created. This image of cold-blooded calmness blends seamlessly with his physical fitness, which is comparable to the level of the best athletes. Moreover, in one fateful moment, an eccentric character dressed in a strange costume crossed the finish line at the same time as the legendary marathoner Belmonteau, which caused a storm of indignation among the audience. The Jack of Hearts is not only impeccable with his body, but also has a brilliant mind. His IQ of 152 only confirms this. After he had proved Hodge's hypothesis, one scholar, moved to tears, declared that he was now ready to die without regret. In reply, the Jack of Hearts, without expressing the slightest emotion, advised him not to delay, for he himself was in a hurry. Meanwhile, behind the mask of a ruthless killer hides an unexpected weakness. He is madly in love with cats, whether they are affectionate pets or wild predators. Surrounded by his furry companions, he suddenly heard a news report on the television that said there was a new assignment: the assassination of the principal of Heroes High School. But it did not arouse his interest in the slightest. He turned off the TV without even listening to the message. A steady voice comes from the TV. Don't you want to know what reward you'll get for completing the task? However, the Jack of Hearts treats this proposal with complete indifference. The only thing that caught his eye was the mesmerizing image of a huge tiger, a cute, toothy beast created using advanced genetic technology. Unable to tear his gaze away from this magnificent creature, he immediately decides to complete the task. He then begins searching for information about the Hero High School Academy, a closed institution that brings together young superheroes from around the world. Recently, the school launched a student exchange program that gave even the average high school student a chance to attend. Studying the comments under the video about this school, Worm Jack concludes that the place resembles a harsh prison. In just a few minutes, he had successfully disguised himself as an ordinary apprentice and was ready to embark on the mission. Later, he finds himself on the deck of a luxury yacht, enjoying the mesmerizing views all around him. A yacht with 3 spacious decks, a gleaming white hull, and a graceful wooden bow was confidently splashing through the azure waters, leaving a long trail of foam and sun glare behind her. Slowly approaching a verdant island adorned with a high cliff and a waterfall whose secrets were hidden in the noonday light, she continued her leisurely journey along the sea surface. When the high school student arrived on the island, his gaze was immediately drawn to the image of a beautiful girl in a swimsuit. She was cheerfully running away from her friend. Her friend, laughing, caught up with her and playfully fired her water pistol at her. Before he could enjoy the fun, the exchange student soon found himself the center of attention. His classmates surrounded him and put on a wreath of brightly colored flowers. He was greeted by a mysterious young man in a wide-brimmed hat, the epitome of the eccentricity of this place. He easily handled the huge elephant that traditionally transported the newcomer. A couple of minutes later, the student, Jack Chen, had already stepped onto the threshold of the school building. As he walked through the corridors, he realized that the outside world was far less demonized than he had been told. As he approached Class F, he realized that Hero High School radiated calmness and joy. It was in stark contrast to the harshness of an ordinary educational institution. With a smile, he walked into the classroom and introduced himself. "Hello, everyone. The exchange student is Jack Chen." But at the same instant, the whip struck his face painfully, leaving a bright mark on his skin. The stern teacher, standing indignantly in front of a confused Jack, accused him of being late, only 12 seconds late. In F class, tardiness was unacceptable. Then she gave him 2 minutes to tell him more about himself. Thus began his unusual school story. Jack Chen smiled again and introduced himself. He announced that he was an exchange student from Qingbei High School, an ordinary guy who admired heroes and was eager to grow up with his new classmates. Then his smile grew wider. "Nonsense. I'm here to kill your director," he said with contrived ease. He then pointed his finger sharply at the teacher and, raising his voice, declared that he would definitely punish her for such an undignified encounter. There was a dead silence in Class F. No one dared to even move. Jack Chen expected at least a hint of support from his classmates, but they didn't even flinch, leaving him alone with the tense atmosphere. The teacher squinted her eyes and her voice became cold and distinctly irritated. She grinned and remarked that Jack Chen's ambition was too high for a newcomer. Her words were not just a rebuke, but a warning. At that moment, Jack felt everything inside him shrink. His thoughts seemed to dissolve, leaving a void, but there was no time to think. He urgently needed to figure out how to get out of this situation. Before he could even move, however, the teacher brought the black whip up to his chin. Her gaze pierced him, and her voice sounded flat and dangerous. "You must have heard that Class F is the worst and most dangerous class in the school. So isn't that why you're thinking of changing the principal?" Without averting her gaze, Sashin Tong added that trying to punish her was not only ridiculous, but also disgusting. In her opinion, only an immature teenager would seriously think of such a thing. Jack Chen looked at the teacher worriedly, realizing that the situation was taking a dangerous turn. He was afraid for his life. The girl with blue hair, sitting in the front row, seemed completely absorbed in the recordings. But deep down, she felt joy. At last, she had found a like-minded person. The guy with the bushy eyebrows only sighed tiredly, clearly unimpressed by what was happening. The bald schoolboy on the penultimate row thought for a moment. He watched Sashin Tong and concluded that her mental torture on an ordinary student was excessive. In his eyes, she deservedly held the title of a deviless. Sashin Tong, not wanting to continue this conversation, told the new disciple to take any available seat. Drops of sweat ran down Jack Chen's forehead. He finally realized that the superpower had been used against him. The realization made his continued presence in the classroom even more unsettling. The bald disciple waved his hand, beckoning Jack Chen to sit down beside him. Jack Chen nodded and headed towards him. As he approached the seat, he said hello to his new classmate. Wei Guangzhai, smiling broadly, glanced at Jack Chen and involuntarily caught his main point. "In any case, we should find a warmer place first, then work." Looking up at the new disciple, Wei Guangzhai asked without further preamble, "Is he a real killer?" Jack Chen smiled awkwardly and hurriedly assured that his classmate had misunderstood everything. He was just trying to make a joke. At this moment, Wei Guangzhai warned him that the F class was populated by the most dangerous scum with superpowers. Then, folding his fingers into a lock, he introduced himself. It turned out that Wei Guangzhai was the head of the Dark Round Table Council codenamed Black Light. He is hiding in this school with one purpose, to kill the headmaster. After that, he suggested Jack Chen to team up. Jack Chen stared at his classmate stunned, trying to realize the meaning of his words. Wei Guangzhai continued. According to him, the world had been under the control of the elites for too long, and ordinary people had only had to accept their slave status. Ironically, Hero High School was also part of this rotten system. Jack Chen scrutinized the expression on his interlocutor's face and concluded that he was speaking sincerely. Wei Guangzhai smirked, put his fist forward, and said that he would deal with everything with his own strength. However, in the next instant, his cheek met the chalkboard sponge that Sashin Tong launched at him. There was a loud shout from her. "How many times have you been told you can't wear sunglasses in class? Are you looking for death?" Jack Chen flinched in surprise. He had never imagined that the students in this school would be treated so harshly. He worriedly asked if Wei Guangzhai was okay, as his nose was bleeding. However, the guy just indifferently waved it off, saying that it was no big deal, and promised that Sashin Tong would still pay for what she had done. Wei Guangzhai is back to discussing the plan again. He said there will be a meeting on Monday morning, at which the director will give a speech at the podium of the sports ground. He said that he needed Jack Chen's help. He needed to stop the principal for only 5 seconds, which would be enough time to eliminate him. In response, Jack Chen waved his hands, assuring him that he was just an ordinary high school student and was not going to participate in the murder. However, Wei Guangzhai did not take no for an answer, saying that he is never wrong, and then called Jack Chen the best guy. It was Monday morning. The atmosphere in the school was tense as all the students gathered in the stadium to listen to the principal's speech. Jack Chen stood in the crowd among his new classmates. He thought for a moment. It seemed he wasn't the only one eager for the principal's death. Rumor has it that the principal of Heroes High School has never been seen openly. All of his photos online have been mosaicked. But today, finally, everyone will be able to see his real face. Suddenly, there was the roar of a passing airplane in the air. The students raised their heads upward, and the crowd excitedly shouted, "The principal has arrived!" A giant airplane with a futuristic design appeared in the sky. Its hull glittered, and a golden symbol shone on its side. It was descending rapidly as it flew over the stadium. Inside the huge aircraft was a darkened cargo bay. In the very center, on a lighted platform, stood a massive machine surrounded by mesh walls. In an instant, the car was out of the airplane and hurtling downward. From a bird's-eye view, it carried straight toward the school stadium. Watching the spectacular appearance, Jack Chen realized that for the headmaster of Hero High School, this wasn't just an arrival. It was a whole spectacle. There were only seconds left before the car touched the ground. At that moment, a huge umbrella, designed for a soft and safe landing, shot out of her. All the students' gazes were fixed on the car that was smoothly descending under the dome of the opened umbrella. But suddenly the cable broke and the umbrella stopped holding the car. Despite this, the director still landed right on the stage in front of the stunned crowd. Jack Chen grinned. It was clear from this demonstration alone that the director loved spectacular appearances and showmanship. A moment later, the car door swung open and everyone saw him. The principal, dressed in an elegant blue pinstripe jacket. One look at the director's expensive shoes, and Jack Chen immediately realized that he was facing a man of high class. After evaluating the yogurt in the director's hand and his trim figure, Jack completed his conclusion. This man obviously cares about his health. However, when he looked at the principal's face, one thing struck him. The features were completely hidden under the mosaic. No matter how hard Jack tried, he still couldn't figure out how the mosaic literally follows the principal around, hiding his face from the others. Meanwhile, the principal waved his hand affably, praised the students for their vigor, and excitedly suggested that we begin the morning love exercise. But suddenly there was a loud voice that broke through the general commotion, seeking to reach everyone present. Wei Guangjai shouted at the top of his voice, "It's a lie! Disgusting fake love! It's time to put an end to it!" Hearing these words, the director, who had been standing confidently behind the microphone before, visibly tensed and even shuddered. Jack Chen, watching the scene, grinned broadly. Everything was going according to plan. In addition, he had earlier successfully used the excuse of leaving the class, citing diarrhea. Walking through the corridors of the school, Jack Chen quickly found the chemistry lab. Fortunately, the industrial-grade glue was ready and just needed to be applied correctly. Jack had spilled it all over the stage beforehand, knowing that the principal would unknowingly smear it all over the podium himself. To make sure everything went perfectly, he also carefully placed ultra-thin needles filled with snake venom. Even if his bald classmate missed, the special poison mixture was guaranteed to destroy the principal in 2 minutes. Of course, Jack had foreseen the possible disruption, so he had already prepared a plan B. However, before proceeding with the backup, he decided to assess the power of the dark round table. Jack was instantly brought back to reality, as everyone around him started putting on their sunglasses. Wei Guangjai stood on top of the building, heroically checking the readiness of all the participants. Then he tossed the loudspeaker aside. It was no longer needed now. The guy grinned and nonchalantly put on his stylish glasses. Suddenly, his gaze hardened, and activating his superpower, he shouted at the top of his voice, "Light disappearance!" In the same instant, a hieroglyph flashed on his forehead, and he himself glowed with dazzling rays. All the students had prepared in advance for the dazzling glow, all except Jack Chen, who looked around stunned, amazed by the glowing baldness of his acquaintance. A moment later, the flash became even brighter, blinding everything around him. Wei Guangjai spread his arms out to the sides and loudly proclaimed, "Let the world feel the pain." Jack Chen, completely unprepared for this turn of events, collapsed to the floor, squirming and squeezing, and cried out desperately, "My eyes! My eyes!" However, the director remained unperturbed. He only calmly held his sunglasses in one hand, and raising them slightly, ordered the injured to be taken to the infirmary. One slight swipe of his fingers was enough to summon the lawman right to the scene. Hearing footsteps approaching behind him, Wei Guangjai felt panic rising inside. He already realized that all his attempts to eliminate the headmaster had been futile. In fear, he turned around sharply to see who was standing behind him. 3 slender young girls appeared before the schoolboy, each armed with a wooden stick. The blonde-haired girl announced sternly, "For the 59th time, the illegal use of light ability on campus has been recorded. There will be no apologies for this. This is the first time physical punishment will be used." Wei Guangjai heaved a sigh of relief. He was even honored to be punished by such a charming lady. He grinned and asked only one thing, not to punch him in the face. However, the girls ignored his request. They started beating him mercilessly with sticks, and then moved on to kicking him. At this time, the students headed to Class F. Jack Chen, sitting at the penultimate desk, sighed heavily. The snake venom didn't work on the headmaster. That was a disappointment. No matter how hard he tried to deny the obvious, dealing with the director was much harder than he'd bargained for. Soon, a battered Wei Guangjai returned to the classroom. He turned to Jack Chen and admitted that he had made a mistake. Now they needed a new plan. However, Jack Chen did not share his enthusiasm. It happened 10 years ago, in the desert of the Middle East. Lighting a cigarette, Adidas, the leader of the Desert Eagle terrorist organization, ordered a bottle of Romani Conti from the 1945th vintage to be brought to him. However, the next second a blue-haired girl appeared in front of him, but in her hands was not at all what he expected. The man exclaimed, "What the hell is this?" The girl looked him straight in the eye and said firmly that it was a medicinal wine that she had prepared especially for him. Suddenly, one of the subordinates ran into the room and, barely catching his breath, squeezed out, "Boss, the wine in your cellar." Adidas jumped up abruptly from his seat, startling the girl sitting next to him, and anxiously asked what had happened to his collection. The subordinate was so frightened he could barely speak. He stuttered as he tried to explain what had happened. Unable to find words, he only slowly raised his trembling hand and pointed at the little girl. She calmly explained that she had recently overheard her blonde sister telling her younger brother that their father was getting weaker. She also recalled the cook's story about ancient books that mentioned a legendary drink called the 9 Dragons, which was to be made from rare lizards and precious wines. The blonde shrieked in panic, "Honey, you're not going to believe this nonsense the girl is talking!" But it was too late. Adidas didn't even listen to her. He silently pulled out a gold-colored pistol and put it to her forehead. Adidas pulled the trigger, and a shot rang out. The hot cartridge case flew out of the bolt, clattering to the floor. The blue-haired girl calmly continued. She had already explained the situation and asked her brother to smuggle the Komodo dragon. But as soon as her words fell silent, another shot rang out, and another shell casing fell to the stone floor. Pointing her finger at her grandfather, who was trying to slip away unnoticed, the girl added that it was Big Beard, who had brought the select wine into the cellar. The man froze, not daring to take a step. Sweat rolled down his face and he stammered, begging his boss to forgive his mistake. But Adidas didn't forgive anyone. Without hesitation, he spent the third round sending Big Beard into oblivion. Then he stepped toward the blue-haired girl. She was calmly pouring the healing drink into a small bowl. When the vessel was filled, the girl gently lifted it to her father, a joyful smile lighting up her face. "Daddy, drink this, it's healthy," she said cheerfully, holding out the medicine to him. But instead of saying thank you, Adidas threw the plate to the side, scattering drops of liquid across the floor. The man clenched his teeth so hard that he bit down on the cigarette. The fragment fell out of his mouth and onto the floor. Without thinking, Adidas ruthlessly grabbed the girl by the throat. He squeezed her neck with force and, lifting her into the air, roared, "You miserable, stinking child! Go to hell!" His fingers clenched even tighter, and a voice full of rage shook the walls. We're not family." The girl dangled helplessly in the air, desperately groping for air with her mouth. Her eyes filled with tears and a look of pain and remorse froze on her face. Suddenly, her tiny fingers touched Adidas's rough, calloused hand. A moment later, she suddenly squeezed his palm tightly. Adidas froze, stunned by her audacity. And then, right before everyone's eyes, her hair began to turn scarlet, as if bursting into flames. Soon, the girl's hair had turned completely scarlet red, and her eyes had turned from blue to bright orange. Through the tears streaming down her cheeks, she looked at the man with fiery anger. The next instant, there was a deafening explosion that lit up everything around it. In the present tense, Jack Chen was sitting with a book in his hands, pretending to read but actually pondering his mission. His gaze slid around the classroom and stopped on Wei Guangzhe. He was sleeping peacefully, sprawled on a chair with a box on his head. Jack Chen sighed. It was clear that it was useless to rely on him. Now he needed someone more adequate, someone who could get information about the director. Carefully covering himself with a book, he began to scrutinize his classmates. His gaze settled on a sturdy guy with a trim, athletic build. The brown-haired man held the massive barbell with ease, on just one index finger, showing his superiority. Then he grinned broadly, exposing white teeth. In that instant, Jack Chen finally discarded the thought of contacting this classmate. Sighing, he continued to look for a more suitable candidate among the students. Jack Chen noticed the guy in the hoodie. Judging by his demeanor, he had a pronounced social barrier that portended difficulties in communication. Holding the book to his chin, he continued to scrutinize the students. His gaze lingered on the underage girl Nini. However, something about her appearance caught her eye, causing Jack Chen to linger on her a little longer. The girl was clearly into experimenting with plants. In class, she grew a giant, repulsive plant that devoured everything indiscriminately. Suddenly, Jack heard a strange sound behind him and instantly turned around. Behind the rows of desks were triplets, busy welding a tank right in the first grade. Amazingly, no one even perceived it as something unusual, as if it happened all the time. After looking around the class, Jack closed the book loudly as he came to a definite conclusion. His final choice fell on the blue-haired girl. Her concentration while writing down her notes was a clear indication of her high academic success. At the same moment, Jack's gaze stopped on the mysterious glass dome, whose purpose remained a mystery. During class, Assassin Tong asked the class leader to take care of Jack Chen. She needed to escort him to the dormitory during lunch break after his independent work, so he could drop off his luggage and then show him around the campus. At this moment, the blue-haired girl put her pen on the table and stood up. Looking at the teacher, she said sharply and confidently, "Roger that." Drops of sweat rolled down the face of the most athletic boy in the class. He was clearly nervous. A classmate who preferred to hide behind a cube because of his difficulty in communicating also became agitated. The guy with glasses glanced carefully in the direction of the new student, and Nini covered her eyes, mulling over her teacher's words. Wei Guangjai panicked, and hiding behind his sunglasses, cast a worried glance at his deskmate. Meanwhile, Jack Chen smirked slyly. The fact that this particular girl was the leader played to his advantage. He could use the situation to get as much information about the headmaster as possible. In the next instant, the blue-haired girl pressed a button located on her desk. Rising from her seat, she walked confidently toward Jack Chen. Stopping nearby, the leader politely asked him to come with her. Smiling, she asked if he would mind if they took the car for ease of transportation. Jack Chen blushed slightly in embarrassment and replied, "Oh, no problem." At the same moment, Zhao Yang approached one of the triplets, Mr. Lin, and asked if she could use his car. Without further question, Mr. Lin tossed her the auto card, letting her know she could take his transportation. The only thing was that he asked her to leave the card on his desk later. Jack Chen and Zhao Yan walked outside and headed towards the parking lot. On the way, he noticed that it wasn't really necessary. They could just walk around. At the same moment, a thought struck him. Now was the perfect chance to familiarize himself with the territory. Upon reaching the place, Jack Chen said with a smile, "This is a tour car." However, when he saw that not just a transport, but a full-fledged armored vehicle was waiting for them, he was at a loss for words. Jack Chen froze in shock, his mouth hanging open and a drop of cold sweat dripping down his face. This place was surprising him more and more. Smiling awkwardly, he scratched the back of his head and asked the leader, "Isn't it a bit of an extravagant to drive an armored vehicle just to carry stuff and tour the campus?" The girl, without expressing an ounce of doubt, opened the car door and, pointing to it, calmly explained, "This transport minimizes any risks." Jack Chen still climbed inside and, sitting down on a chair, wondered, what was so dangerous about this school that it had to be inspected in an armored vehicle? While he pondered the situation, the leader brought a large box. Inside were books, documents, and a few unexpected items. Jack Chen asked in surprise, "What kind of survivalist kit is this?" The girl calmly pulled out a small green jar. "Chewing gum with xylitol. Relieves stress, won't ruin your teeth, and it comes in 12 flavors. Then she pulled out a pillow with a panda pattern on it. "Fixing pillow for the neck," she explained. "It supports your head, and it's also useful for homework." The next item was a small bottle of pills. "Quick-acting remedy for heart attack. Improves blood circulation and activates strength in severe fear." Jack Chen frowned. Severe fear? In a normal school? But the most unexpected was the newest defibrillator. Zhao Yan nonchalantly added, "Just in case the pills don't work." Jack Chen abruptly surged forward and nervously exclaimed, Hey! Are we sure we're just going to look around the campus?" The leader took out the next item, the latest military-grade combat exoskeleton designed by Mr. Lin. All of this, both the exoskeleton and the fighting machine, only drove Jack Chen more into a stupor. As they set off, a war song played over the speakers. "When I took up arms, I was determined to die on the battlefield." The atmosphere in the car was becoming increasingly tense, and Jack Chen, feeling the growing discomfort, awkwardly asked for a change of tune. However, Zhao Yan calmly explained that this song was set by default and could not be turned off. Jack Chen made himself comfortable by using the neck pillow. But soon he remarked unhappily, "We were on our way to see the campus, and you can't see anything in this armored car." In response, the leader pressed a button and a device extended from the top of the machine, allowing her to observe the surrounding area. Jack Chen was no longer surprised at what was happening. Looking at the device, he muttered, "You can even see the student's body temperature." Suddenly, the metal covers of the ventilation shafts on the roof began to bounce and shake, emitting muffled thumps. The next second, blinding flames erupted from the vents, accompanied by a deafening roar. Jack Chen heard the audio alert system. Carbon-based creatures within 500 meters have been recognized, and the Alpha Plasma Annihilator Cannon has begun charging. Countdown, 30 seconds. This was not the leader's plan at all. Zhao Yan awkwardly apologized, admitting that she had mistakenly activated the homing system of the thermal imaging weapon. Dumbfounded by this news, Jack Chen abruptly asked the leader to shut down the system. He was sure it was a critical error. However, no matter how much the girl tried, the button to disable the homing system did not respond. The error message kept repeating. Meanwhile, two massive metal structures with glowing spiral elements on their tops were spewing heavy smoke. The sight only added to the tension in the atmosphere. At that moment, Jack Chen had a plan. He asked the leader not to worry, handed her some chewing gum, and promised to take matters into his own hands. Jack Chen scrutinized the card, contemplating the urgent need to intervene. He realized that if something happened now, his assassination plan would fail. As he looked at the leader, he noticed that the top of her head was beginning to change color to red. The girl looked completely unnatural. Her face was almost indistinguishable. Nervously repeating to himself, "I messed up again. I messed it up again." She seemed utterly depressed. Jack Chen detected the equation on the sensor card and heard the voice of the system alert. It told him that the system needed to be shut down within 20 seconds to fix the problem. However, Jack Chen did not know how to approach the problem because he was facing a non-linear partial derivative equation, the solution of which required considerable effort. As the system signaled the seconds remaining, cold drops of sweat dripped off the guy's cheek. When the system reported that there were 2 seconds left, the girl's hair had almost completely turned a scarlet hue. She was extremely excited and seemed about to explode with emotion. Fortunately, Jack Chen brought his math arsenal to bear and solved the equation instantly. 1 second before completion, he was able to enter the correct solution and send it in. Immediately afterward, he heard the system's shutdown notification, and a sigh of relief confirmed. The worst was over. Jack Chen then grinned and started a conversation with the girl, mentioning that he would like to discuss the headmaster. But when he opened his eyes again and saw the girl's condition, he stood frozen for a moment in surprise. Her hair stood up as if it had been blown about by a strong wind, and her expression and posture showed the peak of anger. Passers-by noticed sparks of light begin to fall from the tiny windows of the armored vehicles. Soon, a deafening explosion tore through the armored vehicle, turning the vehicle into countless wrecks. Its power raised a whirlwind of air, shrouding everything around it in clouds of dust. Jack Chen, who was in the car, was completely burned. His appearance became black like a burnt dish. Zhao Yang, who possessed the White Blast ability, excitedly ran up to the guy and shouted, "Classmate Jack Chen!" The girl immediately called an ambulance, which arrived lightning fast. The paramedics quickly put Jack Chen on a stretcher. Pedestrians were watching the scene, looking from the paramedics to the huge hole in the middle of the road. Jack Chen was carried to an ambulance, and a fence was placed around the giant hole in the center of the road to make sure no one was hurt. At this time, the narrative shifts to a director whose office was located just off the beach. The man watched his reflection in the bottle intently. Even when he was alone with himself, his face was hidden by the patterned mosaic. The principal held in his hand his favorite bottle of milk-flavored stuffed salmon. Looking out the huge window, he thought wistfully about how the exchange student was bringing extra energy to Class F, which he expected. When Jack Chen woke up and opened his eyes, a beautiful girl was standing in front of him. For a moment, he thought he was in heaven. As he scrutinized her face, he noticed her delicate features, blonde hair, and white dress. A real angel, he thought. Suddenly, a man's voice rang out, welcoming him to Class A. Jack Chen looked up and saw a tall, masculine guy approaching confidently, leaving the girls behind. As he walked, the girls showered him with enthusiastic compliments, calling him the tallest, strongest, handsomest, and fairest. This guy with blonde long hair was the leader of Class A, Kuropanov. Upon seeing him, Jack Chen jumped up abruptly, startled by what he saw. He lowered his gaze thoughtfully, and was surprised to notice that all his injuries were gone. Catching the expression on his face, Kuropanov explained with a smile, "Rapid recovery and cell regeneration using sound is an ability of Frayne, the deputy commander of Lisheng Squad." As the Class A leader spoke, Frayne looked away embarrassed. Jack Chen looked at her and thought that such a power could turn the entire world of medicine upside down. He then asked Kuropanov if he knew where the Class F leader was located. Instead of answering, Kuropanov pointed to the door and asked permission to invite the exchange student to show him Class A. Jack Chen agreed without hesitation. Kuropanov, with a sly smile, took the boy on a tour. At the same time, the F-class students approached the gate leading to a magnificent 3-story building. Lichi, formerly a student in Class F, and now transferred to Class A, was blocking the way to the gate. He noticed that the small students from Class F could not get into Class A. The boys were indignant. Wei Guangjie reminded Lichi that he himself had once been in F-class. Master Lin noticed Lichi's hair and remarked that it would be interesting to shave it off for study. Meanwhile, Zhao Yan made it clear that they just wanted to know what was going on with their classmate Jack Chen. Suddenly, she noticed Master Lin holding out a microphone to her. Master Lin corrected his glasses and motioned for Zhao Yan to use the microphone. At the same time, Jack Chen was being given a tour of the Class A training area. While Kuropanov showed him the rooms, Jack Chen was amazed at the elegant interiors. Soon they came to the residential square, as Kuropanov called it. The place was striking. From the small but elegant fountains to the pervasive atmosphere of luxury. Even the dining room resembled a high-end restaurant for aristocrats. It was in the cafeteria that the Class A boys made a stop to show Jack Chen how good their food was. Kuropanov suggested that the boy try Geishia coffee from Emerald Manor in Panama. Jack Chen happily tasted the coffee he was offered. He took a sip and smelled the delicate aroma of bergamot, jasmine, lemon, and honey. The taste of the coffee was so exquisite that the notes of its aroma intertwined as if an angel's hand was gently touching the taste buds. It was a drink worthy of the reputation of the best coffee shop in the world. Although the coffee was truly divine, Jack Chen, as an ordinary exchange student, struggled to find more appropriate words to describe it. The guy smiled and noted that this coffee was far superior to the instant coffee he had been drinking before. Meanwhile, Zhao Yan picked up the microphone handed to her by Master Lin and opened her mouth. After a moment, she called out at the top of her voice, "Jack Chen, are you all right?" Thanks to the super microphone, her voice echoed throughout the dining room. The words were so shrill that they shattered all the glass. Kuropanov reacted instantly. He withdrew his hand sharply, preparing to use his ability. He clenched his palm tightly into a fist and focused all his attention on his superpower. Soon he stopped the flying shards, scattering them into small particles. Jack Chen, an unwitting witness to what was happening, was simply shocked. When the danger passed, Jack Chen realized that the voice was familiar to him and immediately looked out the window. At the window, he saw 3 men standing against the gate. As Jack Chen looked closer, he recognized some familiar faces. The first was Wei Guangjie, who collapsed to the floor at the sudden sound, followed by Master Lin, who had prepared headphones beforehand, and of course, Zhao Yang, who was still holding the microphone. Staring at the laptop screen, Master Lin uttered, "The 11th lethality test of the portable sonic weapon for lethality at minimum power has begun." Meanwhile, Li Qi asked him not to use this weapon as an everyday tool. Jack Chen moved closer and shouted that he was okay, asking the leader not to worry about him. Meanwhile, Zhao Yan, blushing, sincerely apologized for the trouble she had caused. Jack Chen smiled and reassured her. "It's okay. You just wanted to keep me safe on campus." At the same time, he realized that her guilt could be the key to getting important information. Wiping his face with a handkerchief, Kuropanov swiftly approached Jack Chen. Discarding his handkerchief, he stated that since the founding of Heroes High School by the principal, Jack Chen was the first and only person without superpowers to be allowed to attend the school. Kuropanov's voice showed clear displeasure and irritation. Kuropanov emphasized that the gentleman has taken on an important mission to connect superhumans with ordinary people. The Class A leader then pointed his finger at Jack Chen and coldly said, "There is a high probability that those in Class F will become dangerous criminals in the future." He feared that if the F-class students really chose the path of evil, it would only increase the outside world's fear of the heroes. Spreading his arms, Kuropanov loudly declared, "So stay in our A-class. Only we are capable of presenting the true image of heroes to the world." At this moment, Zhao Yang indignantly shouted out that Jack Chen was enrolled in Class F by the principal's personal decision, and Class A students cannot change his fate at will. Meanwhile, Wei Guangjie rose to his feet and irritably threw, "Stop talking to these hypocrites who only pretend to be elites." His gaze settled on Li Qi, and with defiance he uttered, "False light can only be extinguished by darkness." Full of determination, he threw his arm up sharply, trying to rip the box off his head so he could finally use his power. However, things went wrong. Under the stares of those around him, the box wouldn't budge, making him look extremely ridiculous. Infuriated, Wei Guangjie roared and tried to get rid of her with redoubled strength. Li Qi looked at Wei Guangjie in bewilderment, becoming more and more convinced that the F-class students were behaving strangely, to say the least. After realizing his embarrassing blunder, Wei Guangjie admitted that he couldn't get the box off his head. Nevertheless, trying to save face, he said with a look of connoisseurship, "We can discuss everything over a negotiation. I think the best place for that is an A-class restaurant." It was obvious, however, that he was more interested in the opportunity to dine at the expense of the elite than in the dispute itself. Kuropanov looked down at him and interrogated him with a cold sneer. "Are you really going to argue with me?" He immediately made conditions. If the F-class won, Jack Chen would stay with them. Wei Guangjie grinned and suggested another option. If Zhao Yan was going to protect Jack Chen anyway, why not compromise? Class F could cede it to Class A, but in return, they would get the right to use their restaurant during the day. However, Zhao Yan immediately rejected the idea, saying that Jack Chen was a valuable exchange student and an important member of their class. Wei Guangjie looked at her in surprise, and then realized that she was absolutely right. So he upped the ante and offered to trade the right to use the restaurant for an entire week instead of one day. This outburst really made Zhao Yan lose her temper. Unable to hold back, she forcefully slapped the box on Wei Guangzhe's head and then sharply ordered, "Silence!" She then agreed to argue with the Class A leader and clarified what terms he was offering. With the ability to control the power of thought, the Class A leader was absolutely certain of his victory. With a slight chuckle, Kuroponov held out his hand, showing a small sphere floating in his palm. Then, smugly smirking, he uttered, "Let's make a bet. Can you destroy my sphere?" Master Lin scrutinized the force field using his invented goggles. Then, after analyzing the data, he informed the F-class leader, "It would take an explosion of at least 200,000 tons of TNT equivalent to offset this force field." When Jack Chen heard this, he was shocked. Such a force would be enough to level an entire island, the equivalent of 20 atomic bombs. Noticing his anxiety, Frayne smiled softly and tried to reassure him. She assured him that Kuroponov was a consummate martial artist, a favorite of the gods, with unprecedented power of thought. Even if a nuclear bomb exploded in front of him, it would only be a faint flame to him. Jack Chen exhaled confusedly. "It's just not possible." Frayne glanced at him and added that no matter how events unfolded, Zhao Yan simply wasn't capable of creating an explosion of such power. Correcting his glasses, Master Lin confirmed, "Since entering the school, her personal record is only about 11 tons in TNT equivalent." Therefore, he confidently stated, "The probability of Zhao Yan losing in this bet was 99.9 But Zhao Yan only calmly replied that since Jack Chen was already a student in their class, she was willing to take responsibility for him to the end. She looked determinedly at the Class A leader and said firmly, "I promised." Kuroponov grinned, casting a smug look at her. He was confident of his victory. At this moment, Jack Chen walked up to him with a tray with coffee on it. Smiling, he held out the cup, and addressing him as a classmate said, "Harmony is the main thing. You mustn't forget that." Taking a sip of coffee, Kuroponov grinned. "I'll let you figure out who is truly worthy of representing the high school heroes." In the next second, he had already taken a fighting stance, putting his arm forward, ready to use his power at any moment. Zhao Yan, who was standing in front of the gate, realized that the argument had begun, and there was no turning back. Gathering all her resolve, she activated the ability and soared into the air. As Zhao Yan floated in the air, Kuroponov took a step forward, raising his foot. Using his ability, he also took off. Walking through the air, he suggested that the F-class leader continue the duel at altitude so that her explosion would not affect the campus. At this point, Zhao Yang had climbed quite high. To catch up with her, Kuroponov abruptly soared upward, leaving behind Jack Chen, the one who had started this whole argument. The girls in Class A watched Kuroponov enthusiastically, calling him handsome. One of them even dreamily remarked that she would like him to carry her in his arms straight up in the air. Jack Chen was stunned as he watched what was happening. At this moment, he realized that Class A really did have incredibly strong heroes. Li Qi and Mr. Lin raised their heads, carefully watching their class leaders. Meanwhile, Wei Guangzhe was still lying on the ground with a box on his head. The girls of the Law Fighter squad were serenely playing cards. "It's time to open the cards and find out who won." One of the girls showed her card to her opponent, and the latter sighed heavily. Then she cried out unhappily, "Damn! I lost again!" At this moment, the white-haired girl turned to the principal and asked, "Shouldn't we stop the A-class versus F-class duel?" The headmaster responded, assuring her that Kuroponov had a sense of proportion, and such duels did not happen every day. However, the white-haired girl was indignant. The students had violated the 8th article of the school rules, which prohibited the use of superpowers in combat without permission. The director sighed irritably and replied that the lawbreakers should wait for the final confirmation of the violation. Only then would it be possible to take action and punish the perpetrators. Meanwhile, the two leaders, representing such different classes, continued to hover over the island, studying each other closely. They hovered in the air like pieces on a chessboard before a decisive move, assessing the situation and considering tactics. Suddenly, tiny sparks flashed around Kuroponov's hand, shimmering like the reflections of distant stars. Every second their glow grew brighter and brighter, filling the air with tension. Raising his hand palm up, he grinned and said, "We are now 18 kilometers away from the school, so you can blast away as much as you like." Kuroponov concentrated, and a protective dome erupted around him, a perfect sphere of energy, making him virtually invulnerable. As long as this barrier was active, any attacks would be pointless. Zhao Yan, who was standing opposite, nodded, recognizing that the A-class leader was right. Her abilities were too dangerous and could cause harm to those around her. "If people know of my power, they will fear and despise me," she pronounced bitterly. But in spite of everything, The girl smiled. After all, there was a man who didn't reject her. I'm happy that I met Jack Chen. Even when I accidentally blew him up, he didn't get scared or hate me. Angry, the girl couldn't help herself and shouted loudly, I don't want him to leave F class. I want to be friends with him. Zhao Yan was so angry that her ability activated instantly. Her hair quickly turned a bright scarlet color, and a powerful blob of energy formed around her, ready to explode at any moment. After a moment, she opened her mouth and made the sound that signaled the beginning of an explosion. In the next moment, Zhao Yan exploded with a bright flame that emitted a dazzling brightness. Kuropanov, estimating the scale of the explosion, felt fear. Looking down from below, the boys saw a giant shimmering spark whose rays reached all the way to the ground. The explosion was so strong that a powerful wave of wind hit the students. This explosion was so blinding that they were forced to hide from the bright sparks behind their sleeves. Master Lin scrutinized the explosion carefully. He calculated that its power was about 480 tons in TNT equivalent, which meant that Zhao Yan had most likely lost. Meanwhile, a girl from the law enforcement squad was heading to the roof of the school building. She tapped her heels loudly on the roof. Raising her hand to the flames and smoke that stretched upward over the island, she activated her superpower. After that, the girl directed her superpower at the two leaders of different classes. Thanks to her intervention, she had secured Zhao Yan, who had previously fallen at an incredible speed. Now she landed softly on the ground like a feather. A burnt Kuropanov collapsed on the floor next to her. Everyone froze, stunned by what they saw. Only Jack Chen, who had already experienced such an explosion, rushed to Kuropanov, worried for his life. Turning around, Zhao Yan asked confusedly, Did I win? Frayne was dumbfounded. She couldn't understand how a grade F student who was considered inferior could defeat the first in terms of combat power. Covering her mouth with the palm of her hand, the girl stated with confusion that such a thing was simply impossible. However, her expression quickly changed. She covered her nose with the palm of her hand and said with an unpleasant expression on her face that the place stank. It was the smell of Kuropanov. When Jack Chen heard it, he realized that he had overdosed on the laxative he had recently put in Mr. Kuropanov's coffee. Jack Chen continued to ponder Kuropanov's proposal. As he pondered, he realized that if he stayed in Class A, where the strongest heroes were gathered, it would only become more difficult to kill the main one. Suddenly he felt the warmth of a woman's palm touching his arm. Taking Jack Chen's hand, Zhao Yan smiled happily and asked, Classmate Jack Chen, let me walk you to your dormitory and help you with your things. He agreed, and then offered to lend the girl his shirt. Meanwhile, Jack Chen was thinking. He realized that the only way he could think of to make Zhao Yan defeat Kuropanov was to slip him a laxative before the fight. Therefore, he was now mentally apologizing to the Class A leader. A few minutes later, Jack Chen and Zhao Yan stood in front of the dormitory. Looking at the old, dilapidated building, Jack Chen involuntarily compared it to a luxurious A-class estate. Dissatisfaction appeared on his face, and he asked, Leader, is this really our dormitory? Zhao Yan smiled widely and happily replied that yes, that was so. Jack Chen said that he needed to pick up something important from Class A and would stop by there for a while. However, Zhao Yan held the suitcase tightly and didn't let him leave. At this time, Wei Guangjie had finally realized his dream of eating in Class A. Right now, with a satisfied expression on his face, he was lying on the table with his stomach open, and dirty plates filled with leftovers were lying around him. Jack Chen and Zhao Yan entered the dormitory. Walking forward, the girl assured that even though their building was smaller and older than the Class A dormitory, it was still warm and cozy. Zhao Yan smiled sweetly and asked her classmate to let her show her his room. Pointing to the door, she explained that the first floor was reserved for boys and the second floor for girls. Zhao Yan pointed to the door and explained that this was Jack Chen's room. At the same moment, she added that Li Qi used to live here, but after his promotion to Class A, he moved out. Hearing Li Qi's name, Jack Chen immediately remembered that strange guy with a torch instead of a head. Zhao Yan grabbed the doorknob and announced that it was time to go in. As soon as she pulled the handle, however, the door suddenly collapsed sideways. It seemed as if it had just been kicked in and put back up. Anyway, she was no longer locking the room in any way. Jack Chen and Zhao Yan were speechless when they saw what was behind the door. They saw a gloomy, abandoned room with cracked walls, cobwebs in the corners, and broken furniture covered in a thick layer of dust. Jack Chen dumbfoundedly exclaimed that this room looked more like a murder scene than a living space. Zhao Yan awkwardly apologized and explained that Li Qi never let anyone come in here, so no one had looked into the room since he left. She was truly sorry for letting her classmate down like that. Jack Chen waved his hand and replied that it was fine. After all, they were superhumans here. An awkward silence hung in the air. Zhao Yan furtively glanced at Jack Chen while he was trying to come to terms with the idea of living in this room. After a moment, he broke the silence and suggested that the class leader go to the cafeteria together for lunch. Zhao Yan smiled and reported that there was no canteen in their F class. Jack Chen awkwardly grinned and interjected, "What do you mean, no?" At this moment, drops of cold sweat ran down his face. Zhao Yang enthusiastically explained that despite not having a canteen, they have their own vegetable garden and a small rice field. She added that cooking on your own helps you adapt to life better, so it is even beneficial. Putting her hand up, the girl excitedly declared that cooking together not only developed independence, but also bonded their team. Meanwhile, Jack Chen looked away and thought, surely things were only set up this way because they were in the worst class. Zhao Yan thought for a moment, and then looked at Jack Chen and promised to clean his room first. Then she suggested, let's go to the vegetable garden near the dormitory, pick something for lunch, and then cook it. Looking at the girl, Jack Chen thought he could ask her about the headmaster over a meal. It would look more natural that way. All right, I'll go to the vegetable garden right now and find something to eat, he replied. Zhao Yang explained that when he left the dormitory, he should turn left. That's where he would find the vegetable garden. When Jack Chen turned his back to her, Zhao Yan clenched her fists tightly, deciding that by all means, she had to make him feel the warmth of a large family. Lastly, Jack Chen cast a glance at his gloomy room. He really hoped that Zhao Yan would be able to tidy up the place. A few minutes later, he found himself in front of a vegetable garden, but he was immediately faced with a dilemma. Standing at the small white fence, Jack Chen was horrified to find that there were not one, but two vegetable gardens in front of him. Giant plants grew on the left, more like alien plants. It looked as if they had been grown with superpowers. Without thinking, the guy headed towards the huge plants, completely ignoring the vegetable garden with ordinary crops. Beyond that, he didn't even pay attention to the warning sign. Entering the vegetable garden with large plants is forbidden. Stepping confidently along the narrow path between tall corn stalks, Jack Chen enjoyed the warm sunlight. Suddenly he stopped, noticing something curious ahead. They were huge, juicy bunches of grapes, hanging right in front of him and beckoning him. The boy could not pass by. As he came closer, he reached for the grapes. He wanted to eat just a few to assuage his hunger. He plucked one large berry and brought it to his lips. In a second, he had already popped a grape into his mouth, not realizing that it wouldn't please the grape itself. Suddenly, the berry made a grimace and sneezed loudly. The next moment, the grape exploded right in Jack Chen's mouth. Chewing it over, the boy was surprised to note that the flavor was superior to any grape he had ever tasted. It was impossible to describe it with the word delicious alone. These grapes were just killer delicious. Hearing the strange sounds, Jack Chen became wary and once again scrutinized the bunch in front of him. He noticed with amazement that each grape had its own facial features. But the creepiest part was that they all looked angry. Upon realizing this, Jack Chen cried out fearfully, "The grapes! Alive!" When he heard movement behind him, he turned around sharply and saw other fruits and vegetables, watermelon, tomato, carrot, and a host of others, begin to move as well. In the next instant, they attacked him once, spewing juice in all directions. At first, it was only small attacks. Jack Chen got some fruit juice on his wrist, which surprised him greatly. But suddenly all the fruits and vegetables abruptly snapped out of their seats. In the next instant, they soared into the air and, like a living army, surrounded the guy from above. Jack Chen immediately realized that the real fruit slicing was about to begin, so he instantly took out a sharp blade from his pocket. Armed with small knives, he got into a fighting stance. Smiling broadly and confidently clutching the hilt of his weapon, he uttered, "Come on, I am the Jack of Hearts." Without waiting for the fruits and vegetables to approach, Jack Chen himself rushed forward, showing that he was fully prepared for battle. In that epic moment, time seemed to stand still as Wormjack stopped, raising his knife hand, and was only a millimeter away from the watermelon. In the next instant, he jumped up lightning fast and easily chopped down whatever was ahead of him. As he finished slicing, he landed and slid to the ground, desperately trying to slow down. Right above him, a huge amount of fruits and vegetables exploded into pieces, and appetizing juice began to drip from the cut fruits. Jack Chen clenched his fists as he looked around at the chaos around him. Cut oranges, cucumbers, onions, pears, strawberries, and many other fruits were lying everywhere. Breathing heavily after slicing so rapidly, he wiped his forehead and grinned. Not a bad warm-up before a meal. Suddenly, tiny green outgrowths appeared next to his shoe. In just a couple seconds, they grew to his height, surrounding him on all sides. At that moment, he heard a familiar voice. His classmate was accusing him of stealing vegetables. It was Nini, the same girl he'd first noticed in class with that weird plant ready to devour anything. Her plants instantly braided his arms and legs, rendering him unable to move. A huge durian hovered above him. Jack Chen raised his head fearfully, glancing at the wild plant. At the same instant, it opened its giant maw, clearly intending to attack him. Jack Chen was completely at the mercy of the monstrous plant and could not resist. In an instant, the predatory fruit closed its jaws and swallowed him, leaving only his legs sticking out. Meanwhile, Zhao Yan finished cleaning the room. She thought that Jack Chen should have already gathered the vegetables and returned. However, when she looked around, she noticed he was still gone. Deciding that he had probably just stepped out into the hallway, the girl looked out the door. But the dormitory was empty. There was dead silence all around. At this time, Jack Chen was in the mouth of a huge durian. Only his legs were sticking out ridiculously from the mouth of the predatory plant. After all that had happened, Jack Chen decided to take a shower. He remembered how Zhao Yan had found him in time and rescued him. Back then, the predatory plant had abruptly spat him out along with its sticky juices, so now he was covered in mud and smelled disgusting to say the least. At that moment, Zhao Yan excitedly rushed towards him, ready to provide assistance. Jack Chen now realized, if the leader was even a few minutes late, he could be in this mutant's belly forever. After a while, Jack Chen finished taking a shower and turned off the water. Then he put on clean clothes and wiped his head with a towel. Even though it was the third time he'd showered, he still had the unpleasant odor of durian. Zhao Yan, noticing Jack Chen, who had just come out of the shower, immediately bowed politely and apologized for forgetting to warn which part of the vegetable garden was for eating. Jack Chen smiled and asked her not to worry, assuring her that he was fine. Covering her nose from the foul odor, Zhao Yan asked, "Really, Jack Chen?" Turning his attention to his classmate Elizabeth, Jack Chen realized that she was still angry with him. He shared his concerns with Zhao Yang, who confirmed that Elizabeth was very angry with him because he had cut up so much of her fruit. Then Jack Chen asked, "Is cutting a few fruit such a serious offense?" Zhao Yang explained that for Elizabeth, plants are almost like family members. She then added that since he had cut a large amount of fruit, for Elizabeth it amounted to a massacre in her house. Jack Chen was startled and cried out awkwardly, "Is it really that serious?" Zhao Yang said that a similar incident had already happened last summer. Wei Guangzheng, a classmate of Alice Beth's, broke into Alice Beth's garden and stole a watermelon to enjoy its juiciness. That night he tasted a juicy watermelon and quietly said, "Summer when you don't eat watermelon doesn't count as summer at all." Naturally, Elizabeth spotted the robber, and Wei Guangzhen was expected to be severely punished. Elizabeth ordered her plants to tie him up, hanging him head down and leaving him unclothed, and the inscription, "I am guilty," was carved on his body, making him hang like a punished man. After realizing the seriousness of the situation, Jack Chen said that he needed to get Elizabeth to forgive him as soon as possible. Zhao Yan tried to calm him down, assuring him that she already had a plan to make Elizabeth accept the apology. At this moment, a joyful smile appeared on Jack Chen's face, and a spark of hope for salvation flashed in his soul. Zhao Yan immediately got to work. She put a white towel on her head, and then helped Jack Chen do the same. Together, they squatted in a clearing near the old fruit grave, where the girl placed the bills between herself and Jack Chen, as if creating a ritual circle. Then she resolutely took the bills in her hands and threw them upward as a symbol of change. Covering her face with her hand, Zhao Yan cried, pitifully lamenting the fruits, naming watermelon, grape, orange, pear, apple, orange, and kiwi. Jack Chen looked at the girl with his mouth open, amazed at what was happening. The whole scene looked more like street fruit trading than sincere grief. Elizabeth joined in the mourning as well. She lowered her gaze sadly and began to apologize for not being able to take proper care of the fruit. She then began to call each fruit by name: Taylor, Apo, Katie, Justin, Charlie, Nono. Hearing this, Jack Chen became even more convinced of how important these fruits were to her. Zhao Yan bowed her head and sharply pressed Jack Chen, urging him to bow, and loudly apologized to Elizabeth, saying that they were wrong. Meanwhile, Elizabeth continued to name the remaining fruits: Rasputin, Bob, Charles, David, Summer, Kawaii. While she mourned her fruit, Zhao Yang asked Jack Chen to join in the apology. Then Jack Chen turned to Elizabeth. "I want to take care of the plants for the rest of my life. I will never let food go to waste. Please forgive me." However, Elizabeth didn't pay much attention to his words and continued to call out names: Li Bai, Gaddafi, Sanshin Mi. Then she moved on to other fruits, naming them Sisika, Chaplin, Tiramisu, Little Star, Pinocchio, Mr. Mighty, Lena, Macaroni, Peppy. Looking at the huge grave of fruit, Elizabeth named the following members of her family: Merlin, Tom, Jerry. Jack Chen thought that finally the girls would no longer have to repeat all these names. Jack Chen was amazed at how Elizabeth was able to memorize the names of each fruit. In an instant, Lightning flashed over Jack Chen, tearing apart the dark sky, and he involuntarily held his breath, feeling anxiety gripping his heart. Jack Chen and Zhao Yan gazed at the sky carefully, anticipating the approaching rain. Watching the thundercloud, Jack Chen realized it was a harbinger of an impending tropical storm. At first, the weather was calm and warm. Only a second later, however, a slight breeze touched them, heralding a change. A few moments later, the gusts intensified so that Elizabeth lost her beret, and Jack Chen and Zhao Yang had to resist the onslaught of wind with all their might. The powerful gust reached even the delicate flowers that Elizabeth had grown in a pot with trepidation. The wind blew the flower pot from her hands and lifted it into the air, as if repeating the gesture with the lost beret. Not wasting a moment and not wanting to part with her precious plant, Elizabeth activated her ability, summoning long green stalks. Stems had no trouble returning her beret, but she still couldn't reach the flower pot. No matter how hard they tried, their length was not long enough to grab the pot of roses. Elizabeth froze, realizing that her attempts were futile. Confusion overwhelmed her, but there was no time to think. Jack Chen realized this was his chance to apologize. Without thinking, he rushed forward. Lightning crossing his eyes to Elizabeth, he threw her a brief glance. Turning around, he confidently told her to leave it to him. He would help. Remembering how Elizabeth always kept that pot of roses close by, Jack realized how important it was to her. He sped up, not wanting to miss the opportunity to make amends. Raising his head, he saw that the flower pot was already floating too high. Suddenly there was a boulder in front of him. Without thinking, Jack pushed off and jumped up. In an instant, he was on top of the rock, ready for the next leap. Pushing off the cobblestone, Jack Chen jumped high, stretching his arm toward the rose pot. He called it a leap of faith. Fortunately, he managed to grab the pot in midair. He clutched it tightly in his hand, intending to carry it to Elizabeth. Floating in the air, Jack Chen smiled contentedly. He had succeeded in helping his classmate. However, after realizing the height he was at, the guy suddenly went cold with fear. Clutching the pot tightly to himself so as not to drop the flowers, he began to plummet downward, shrieking loudly in terror. He shouted without a word, for he had not thought at all about how he was going to land. At the last moment, while in the air, he managed to twist, turning his body around so that he was falling with his feet instead of his head down. Cold sweat ran down his face, but despite his panic, he tried to pull himself together. The first thing to do was to look around and find something to cushion the fall. His gaze stopped on the palm trees growing nearby. Without wasting any time, Jack Chen released the cat hook, pointing it towards the trees. Luckily, the guy managed to get his hook caught in one of the palm trees. He hung over the raging water, holding onto the rope wrapped around his wrist. The huge waves slammed into each other with force, making the situation even more dangerous. The storm did not subside for a second. The strong wind swayed the palm trees, bending them to the ground. Suddenly, a coconut snapped off one of the palm trees and flew downward. Raising his head, Jack Chen realized that he was about to be in a lot of pain. The coconut was rapidly falling right on top of him, and after a moment was only a few millimeters from his head. There was a thud. The fruit landed right on the guy's face. The coconut slipped, leaving behind the unpleasant consequences of Jack Chen's nose bleeding immediately. Looking up, he was horrified to see 4 more coconuts flying straight at him. The first of them slapped his right cheek with force. The second coconut came down with force right on the top of Jack Chen's head. The third one hit his chin, barely grazing his ribcage. And the fourth, in the same cheek that had already suffered from the previous blow. The new blow resounded with a sharp, searing pain. In spite of all this, Jack Chen did not loosen his grip. He knew that if he loosened his grip for even a moment, the wind would carry the precious plants away, and then all the risk would be for nothing. The thought that this was just part of the mission crept into his mind for a moment. Was it worth risking his life like this? But Elizabeth's worried face came to mind. It was for her sake that he had gone to the end. Remembering her, he suppressed the pain and gathered his resolve. With his mouth hanging open, he shouted, overlapping the rumble of the wind, "Damn it! Don't underestimate the #1 killer, the Jack of Hearts!" So far, everything was going according to plan. One end of the rope was securely hooked to the tree with a cat hook, and the other was wrapped around his wrist, keeping him safe. But suddenly, Jack Chen felt a sharp pain as the rope began to mercilessly cut into his skin. In the next instant, the noose tightened even tighter, and scarlet drops of blood ran down his arm. Meanwhile, the wind was gaining strength. One particularly strong gust hit the palm tree, shaking it so much that the roots began to break. In the next second, the tree was ripped from the ground with a crack, and it soared into the air, obeying the fury of the elements. Jack Chen, who had been holding onto that palm tree all this time, froze. Looking down, he realized the horror of the situation. A single thought flashed through his mind. "I'm finished."